Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks to MLA for the invitation to speak today, and also for funding the work that I'm going to talk about this afternoon. So we started working with MLA on goat nutrition back at the end of 2018. And since then, I've had the opportunity to talk at a few goat webinars and a few field days out in West Queensland over the last couple of years. And there's been lots and lots of interest, lots of people turn up. They've been good fun, really enjoyed that, and lots of really, really good questions. So I think, I know I'm preaching to the converted a little bit, but it's a really exciting time for the goat industry, and there's a real lot of good energy, positive energy about the industry, and a lot of hunger for new information on how to develop and refine these goat production systems. As you know, the whole industry is evolving really quickly with new people coming in and more sophisticated production and marketing systems developing. So yeah, it's been really good. And I still don't have any silver bullets for you all, but nevertheless, it's been really good work, and I've found that I tend to learn more from the producers and the questions they ask than they probably learn from us. So I'll get on with it, eh? That kind of feeds into our project that we finished late last year, and it was about determining the response of rangeland goats to supplements. And when we started this work, the issue that we were faced with, or our brief, was to look at the response of young underweight goats. And at that time, underweight goats were of no commercial value. So our target was young bucks that were 15 to 20 kilograms, and we were looking solely at rangeland bucks, because these were the ones that industry deemed to be an issue. So a producer musters all their goats in, and anything that's light couldn't go on the truck. So what do they do with them then? Can we use supplementation to get them up to market weights? It's not the issue that it was anymore, because the market specs have changed a bit, I think. So we ran a number of experiments. All of our experiments were ran during September to December. So we avoided that photo period effect. All our goats were in individual indoor pens, so we could get individual intake data. We could control the amount of supplement they got, and we could measure individual weight and all the other parameters we measured. In all of our experiments, we fed Mitchell grass hay as a low quality base diet. And you can see there it was pretty low, but that's typical of the dry season across Northern Australia. So it was a fairly representative, industry relevant feed for Northern Australia. The supplements that we trialled: cottonseed meal, whole cottonseed, loosened chaff, urea, molasses mix, rolled wheat, rolled sorghum, loosened pellets, and a range of other commercial pellets. In all these experiments, some goats didn't receive a supplement, and they basically maintained weight when they were just fed the Mitchell grass alone. In picking these supplements, whenever we meet producers, they always say, "Oh, why didn't you try this or that?" And they're all good questions, and they're all locally relevant feeds, of course. But within the constraints of the budget and time, we couldn't test every possible supplement. So we identified feeds that at the time we thought were geographically or regionally relevant around the cotton industry, I guess, or were representative of types of feed. So lucerne as a legume, for example, cottonseed meal as a protein meal, wheat as a highly available starch source, and sorghum a little bit lower, and those types of things. So we acknowledged we couldn't test everything, but we tried to test as broad a range as possible in these experiments. So without pulling together all the data, this is the key kind of output for us. And what we've got here is for all of the supplements that we detected a response to. And by that, I mean, we saw an increase in live weight gain in response to an increase in the amount of supplement the goats consumed. So along the horizontal axis here, we have actual supplement intake. And on the vertical axis, we have average daily gain above our unsupplemented goats in each of these experiments. And there were 4 experiments with a large number of supplements. And you can see here the different sorts of response lines that we get, response equations. So goats fed the loosened chaff and loosened pellets had a lower live weight gain than ones fed the wheat, which was lower again than the ones fed the commercial pellets that we bought. The response to cottonseed meal here is very typical of a response of a ruminant to a protein meal, where you see a very significant response early at low levels of supplementation, but as that supplement level increases, the response in terms of live weight gain plateaus a little bit. I might skip over that. That's just intake data that shows increasing total intake in response to supplements going this way. But what happens to our Mitchell grass, and Reza was talking about this, as we increase the energy supplement intake, our intake of Mitchell grass actually drops away. So it's about finding that threshold between utilising our cheapest available feed resource, which is the pasture base, versus the response we're going to get from putting more supplements in. So now I'm just going to have to jump out, and hopefully this works. Someone will tell me if it hasn't. So we used all that. All good?
All good, Simon.
Thank you. So we used all that information to develop this calculator, and it's not available just yet, but I've just been given some instruction on how we're going to get it branded and posted online soon. The other thing that we're able to do is collate all our data and look at some of these more basic nutritional requirements. So this one is around the energy requirements for goats. And we talked about some of these different feeding standards that are available. This is the American system here. And they have a maintenance energy requirement of around 500 kilojoules per kilogram metabolic weight. Don't worry about the terms, that's just scientific jargon. We like to overcomplicate things as nutritionists, but it's the levels and responses that are important. In our data, we found that it was closer to 400, and that aligns pretty well with some work from the 80s by Barry Norton and Andrew Ash, where we got this same threshold here. So this is what I mean about just making sure that we're using locally relevant data in our calculations for nutrient requirements. This figure is in the final report, and that's available online. This is protein requirements. It's also in the final report. So one of the things, just to wrap that up about the supplementation, is that we've established some principles here and we've developed the calculator, but really I think it requires validation under commercial conditions. Melanie mentioned the PDS call at the moment, and I think this is a great opportunity for a number of producers to get together and think about establishing a PDS around supplementation. Got a whole range of variables there that could be considered. It's not my business to form a group or anything like that, but if there's people interested and they're looking for a bit of advice on how you might set up a PDS site and what sort of data to collect, happy to take any calls or any emails. My details are at the back end of the talk here today. Just wrapping up pretty quickly, I'm sure I'm nearly out of time. At the end of all our supplementation trials, we're actually faced with the same issue as the producers, in that we had a whole bunch of underweight goats because some of those goats didn't get any supplement and some got very little. So what we did was we took the opportunity and put them in group pens and tried to finish them out to market weight at the time. And probably equally interesting compared as the supplementation work that we did. Sorry, skip back. So at the end of the first experiment here on the left, we just split the goats in half, and we gave half of them access to a pellet, a commercial pellet, and half of them access to loosened hay from a feeder. Both groups had access to a low quality roughage source just for rumination. And you can see the responses we got there, up to 200 grams a day when they had ad lib access to the pellets, and about 130 grams a day when they had access to the lucerne. What's really interesting though is the huge variation that we saw here. And you can see down the bottom there, these goats under these conditions ranged from 100 grams a day up to 300 grams a day. And there's, for sure, there's behavioural issues there as well as genetic variation influencing that. We saw the same huge variation in the individual pens as well in terms of their supplement and Mitchell grass hay intake. So the second time we did this, we split them into heavy and light groups and fed both groups the same pellet as over here. We used a 3-week adaptation period, sorry. And you can see their growth rates were a little bit lower there. But once they were on full ad lib feeding, again, with their lighter goats at least, we were hitting up around that 200 grams a day mark. Again, significant variation, between 0 up to 250 grams a day for these goats. It's not a huge number there. It's about 60 or 80 goats in each of these experiments. And again, similar sort of result here. We had them split them into light and heavy groups. The heavy group this time performed slightly better. Back here, the light group performed slightly better. Again, huge variation. Each of those points is an individual goat. So huge individual variation under identical conditions, group feeding. So repeatable responses to a starch pellet, 1 to 1.4 kilograms per week after adaptation. It was pretty repeatable for us. We didn't have any individual intake data, but the actual weight gains were pretty repeatable at an average level across the groups. The responses, though, were highly variable, and you can see that there. Most of our work before this was with cattle, and we had a lot to learn about the goats, particularly when we put them out in the group pens. And that was really interesting. Every day they were up to something different, and we had to learn on the run. And we're doing modifications to how we segregated them, how we moved them together, how we fed them, modifying hay feeders, trialing all sorts of things, having, different sort of enrichment in the pens. So it's really good. Probably a few little practical tips there, and happy to talk to others who probably have more experience in this space than us. But we're happy to share out what we learned and what we tried as well. So summing up, what did we achieve? Well, we determined some responses of rangeland goats to protein and energy supplements, but really the next step now is for validation under grazing conditions. I just wanted to point out that specific goat mineral requirements are largely unknown. We currently use sheep estimates as far as I know in Australia. We've developed a calculator that'll be available on the MLA website soon. I think we're pretty confident that the potential growth rates of rangeland goats in intensive feeding systems, we can get 1 to 1.4 kilograms per week. want to point out that that's rangelands. I'm sure you will get far more with your boar and other meat breeds as well. We saw large variation in response, whether that was in the individual pens or the group pens. Whether there's an opportunity there for genetic selection of better doers within the rangeland goat herd or not, it's an interesting question. And finally, I also wanted to give a shout out to GERDAC. Melanie introduced them. I found them to be a really, really enthusiastic group, really supportive of our research, really interested in it, and great listeners. And I would encourage anyone who's got any ideas for research or even wants to get involved in GERDAC to look them up. I think Melanie put the details there. I certainly found it a really great group to work with. And that's it. Thank you very much. There's my details there. I'd like to give another shout out to our team, the goats, the greatest of all time there. Really fortunate to work with Nick Perkins, Catherine Locke-Watts and Trish and Jim McKenzie. They sold us goats to spec for all of our trials. And we had a large team involved at UQ that were involved in all these studies as well. So heads up to them.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Simon. That was a really great presentation. And I think you summed it up really nicely, the importance of research and how it can have a really great impact with meaningful outcomes that can be applied to a producer level. So thanks very much for your great insight and wonderful presentation.